Esther Gitu Yuat. It's Friday, July 28th. This is Africa 54. On the final day of the two-day Russia-Africa summit, Russian President Vladimir Putin hails Africa's growing role in global affairs while offering to expand Russia's political and business ties with the continent. The general who led a coup in Niger has defended the overthrow on state television and asked for support from the nation and international partners. And Heather Maxwell, host of Music Time in Africa, tells us how Kiswahili Day was celebrated this year in Kenya. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin in Russia. On day 2 of the Russia-Africa summit, Russian President Vladimir Putin told African leaders on Friday that Moscow respected last month's peace proposal for war in Ukraine and was carefully studying it. Putin also told the African leaders that Russia is increasing food supplies to Africa, including some free grain shipments. Putin also says he is interested in developing military cooperation with the continent. At Friday's session of the summit in St. Petersburg, Putin said Russia is prepared to supply some weapons to Africa for free to enhance security on the continent and to work more closely with African law enforcement and intelligence services. As the world tensions grow due to the increase in food prices following Moscow's withdrawal from the grain shipment agreement signed with Ukraine and Turkey, Russia is seeking to cast its image as a partner of the African continent. Marcus Harton narrates this report from the VOA Moscow Bureau.
African delegations arrive in St. Petersburg for a summit overshadowed by the war in Ukraine and Russia's efforts to mitigate its isolation. 17 heads of state joined this meeting, 18 fewer than the last summit 4 years ago in Sochi. Moscow accuses Washington of pressuring Africans not to attend the summit, where President Putin on Thursday promised substantial direct aid to the continent.
I am ready to grant at no charge from 25 to 50,000 tons of grain to Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, the Central African Republic, and Eritrea in the coming months, in the next 3 to 4 months.
Russia called the summit as world tensions grow due to an increase in food prices following Moscow's withdrawal from the grain shipment agreements it had signed with Ukraine and Turkey.
Yes, it's very, very important because Russia is known for that fertilizer relation, because supplying of fertilizer to African countries from Russia is very, very profound.
But there is agreement on little else, and some at the gathering were preparing to call on Russia to halt its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Of all the participants, Obasanjola says only Russia appears interested in continuing the war.
African countries going to Russia to see how they can also put certain pressure psychologically, of course, on Russia and Ukraine to come on the peace agreement.
Many in the West see the two-day summit as a propaganda move by the Kremlin to show that it is not cut off from the world. But observers say it is also an opportunity to speak frankly with Russian leaders on the need to bring peace to Ukraine. For the VOA Moscow Bureau, Marcus Harton, VOA News.
For more on Russia's various offers to Africa, including disinformation, I'm joined live from the U.S. State Department by James Rubin, Special Envoy and Coordinator, States Global Engagement Center. Mr. Rubin, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
Now, Putin knew of the impact of the war on Africa's food needs, yet halted the grain deal with Ukraine. Now he is promising free grain to some African states. Can the continent pin its hopes on his offer?
Well, I certainly hope that countries in Africa and the people in Africa are not deceived by what's going on right now. Just in the last week, President Putin has destroyed the method we had to provide millions and millions of tons of food around the world, who escorted ships that solved the problem created when Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place. The truth of the matter is that Russia has now begun to use food as a weapon in this war. And it is the most vulnerable people in the world, in Africa in particular, who are going to suffer if we don't find a way to get the grain out of Ukraine into world markets. Putin's decision to pull out of the grain initiative has increased prices by 20%, and is now denying Ukraine an opportunity to, remember, Ukraine is the country called the breadbasket of the world, and Putin has now shown that he's going to make food a weapon, because he's not only pulled out of the grain initiative, but is attacking the facilities, the ports, the rivers, all the places in which grain could be exported. He's making food a weapon because he's hoping that the world will put pressure on the West, when the truth is that Vladimir Putin just doesn't care about the effect that this food potential crisis would have on the most vulnerable populations. He's making them a hostage in his war. He's trying to break the will of the West and the world. When he invaded Ukraine in the first place, he broke rule number one of the international system, and now he's showing he's broken rule number one of international morality, because he doesn't care about the most vulnerable.
You know, Mr. Rubin, beyond the rhetoric, can Putin prove that he respected the Africa peace mission that went to Moscow and Kyiv to end the hostilities between his country and Ukraine?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. Vladimir Putin knows that the negotiations are always possible. He's shown no interest in it. He's shown nothing but willingness to keep attacking Ukraine, trying to destroy its economy, now trying to weaponize food. He's got no interest in peace. He's making a polite response to the African Leaders Initiative, because he's trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. The food crisis that they're going to face from increased prices is Vladimir Putin's latest weaponization of food and attempt to intimidate the world. I hope people don't get fooled by it. He's not interested in peace. He launched this war in the first place, and now he's launched a war against the world's most vulnerable people by making food a weapon, attacking grain facilities. Just yesterday, they attacked one facility that had 60,000 tons of grain could have been sent around the world, destroyed by Russian missiles and Russian attacks. The idea that Vladimir Putin cares about peace is pretty laughable.
Interesting, because you mentioned about being laughable. Now he is also offering to supply certain weapons, as you heard us mention earlier. Should Africa ask itself, why are we getting these weapons, and at what cost? Does this also concern the West?
Well, it does concern the West. I think you saw, in addition, your reporter mentioned that they offered a small amount of food to 6 particular countries. Well, you should look at those countries. Those are the countries where the Wagner Group, this monstrous private military company, has slaughtered innocent people and used disinformation and intimidation to cause terrible problems in those countries. Those are the ones he's offering a small amount of food. Well, 10 times that amount of food each month is blocked because of his pullout of the grain initiative. President Putin uses weapons to try to develop friendships with countries that don't want those relationships examined by normal procedures to see how the weapons are used. So he's creating essentially colonies of countries where he gives weapons and gives food and hopes they'll salute his policies that are doing such grave damage to the people of Africa and obviously to the people of Ukraine.
A lot of very concerning offers here, including partnering with Africa's law enforcement and intelligence services. Mr. Rubin, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
James Rubin, a special envoy and coordinator of State's Global Engagement Center. Now to Niger, where a general who led a coup has defended the takeover on state television and asked for support from the nation and international partners. Thursday, in the army, supporters of the mutinous soldiers who orchestrated the coup demonstrated in the streets and concerns that are growing of political crisis could set back the country's fight against jihadists and increase Russia's influence in West Africa. Various factions of Niger's military have reportedly wrangled for control since members of the presidential guard detained President Mohamed Bazoum. General Abdurrahman Chiani has identified himself as the leader of the group of soldiers who say they staged the coup. French President Emmanuel Macron spoke with embattled Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum Friday and says he is reachable and in good health, according to the AFP news agency. Leaders of Niger's army have declared their support for Wednesday's overthrow of Bazoum, defying worldwide calls for condemning the takeover and for respect of the rule of law and the country's democratic order.
If you don't belong to such a political party today, you do not even have the freedom to express yourself freely. There are many things that can justify this coup d'etat. For the moment, we remain optimistic.
Supporters of the coup ransacked and set fire to the headquarters of Bazoum's Party for Democracy and Socialism.
The President of the Republic got himself into a position of power that left things to chance, despite a very complicated context. Look at the situation in the country, the ordeal the people of Niger face, the question of insecurity.
Now, this time, Bazoum's whereabouts remain unclear, but Abdel Fatou Musa, Commissioner for Political Affairs and Security of the Economic Community of West African States, told VOA that, quote, Bazoum remains the legitimate and legal president and must be reinstated as soon as possible. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is urging coup leaders to return the democratically elected Bazoum to power. For more insight into Niger's coup, I'm joined live via Skype from here in Washington by Kenneth Mwenda, a professor of law at the University of Western Cape in Cape Town, South Africa. Professor Mwenda, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther.
This is a concerning story. What's next for ousted President Mohamed Bazoum?
I think the situation right now is sort of in a flux. The junta that is purporting to have taken over the government has not effectively succeeded. They are somewhat in between succeeding and just a mere attempt. I would liken this to the Zimbabwean experience under President Mugabe. For a military coup to be successful, two fundamental issues must be present. One, the takeover must be effective. Secondly, the new regime, the junta that comes into power, has to have control and often suspend the constitution and enact military resolutions which will be enforced until the transition is sort of completed seamlessly. But those characteristics and attributes of a successful military coup seem to be lacking. So I am quite skeptical to say, I think France, there are reports from France that, they're saying this is not a really successful military coup. I mean, the president also has his supporters, although the military are behind the junta, quite all right. But it's a very sort of convoluted process right now. It's very unclear.
So, right, given the history of coups in Niger, do you think that President Bazoum missed certain elements that a coup was imminent?
Niger has had 4 military coups, I think, since independence. And if you look at the Sahel region, especially Central Africa and West Africa, from 2020 to date, this is during the COVID pandemic, there have been about 7 military coups in that region. And so this is somewhat spreading like a little pandemic of military coups into the neighboring countries. Look at Burkina Faso, look at Mali, and so forth. So one, of course, would want to believe that the president should have foreseen this coming. The arguments that, two fundamental arguments that the junta is pushing. One, that there's security concerns in the country. The second one is about governance, economic and social governance, that, this has really collapsed, and so they're coming in to restore this. These are the two arguments in France they are using because of course, the security situation, the jihadists coming from the neighboring Sahel region. So, but again, the President Bazoum has had good relationships with a number of Western countries, the US in particular. to try and fight off these insurgents, jihadists. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out and how much support he may get despite being under confinement from his Western allies, and how the junta will move this forward.
Professor, what does the international law say about coups such as the one in Niger?
A coup, if it succeeds, like I pointed out, if it meets those two criteria, effective takeover and you are in control, well and good. It's now a question of finding political legitimacy to be recognized not as a state, but as a government. In international law recognition, there are two types of recognition. There's that of a state and the government. And also there's what we call de jure and de facto recognition. So far, we have not seen any form of de facto or de jure recognition whatsoever regarding the junta. But the United Nations Charter is somewhat silent on internal infractions or dispute or conflict in a country, because the basis of international law is that other states cannot interfere unless they are invited to help with the situation. There are only 3 instances in international law where there could be external interference. One, under the UN Security Council resolution. If the UN Security Council makes that decision, that let's have a joint collective action. Secondly is when there's issue of self-defense against maybe external aggression in your neighboring state. The third one is when you're invited in by the states that's under siege to say, come and help us as a neighboring country, you can move in. So right now, the international community is just watching. There have been statements from Moscow, statements from Africa Union, statements from Washington, statements from Paris. So it's a very delicate situation right now.
Wow, Professor. Well, there will be implications definitely in the region. Thank you very much for your insight, Professor.
You're most welcome.
Kenneth Mwenda is a professor of law at the University of Western Cape in Cape Town, South Africa. Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Kenyans celebrate Kiswahili Language Day. Stay with us.
Women are often major targets and victims of terrorists, non-state armed groups, or criminal networks. As terrorism and extremism continues to take a heavy toll on communities in Africa, countering and preventing heinous acts often requires active participation and requires the strong leadership of women. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we will explore women's anti-terrorism activities on the continent. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
In other African news, Sudan's Darfur region became synonymous with genocide and war crimes 2 decades ago. Now reports of new atrocities, including attacks on towns, widespread killings and rapes, are emerging from the region amid months of fighting between Sudan's military and a powerful paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces, according to the Associated Press. Nigeria's scrapping of its petrol subsidies has ended the fat profits that smugglers made by sneaking fuel into Niger. In Niamey's suburbs, residents are no longer witnessing the chases between customs officers and gasoline vendors. Also gone, a steady flow of cars and motorcycles shuttling loaded cans of petrol across the border. And Argentina launched a comeback to deny South Africa a first win ever at the Women's World Cup on Friday as European champions England, who stood on the brink of the last 16, handed Denmark a defeat. South Africa was cruising to a historic first win before Argentina rallied for late goals and victory. Now, as part of the U.S. government's Young African Leaders Initiative, 23 young leaders from 18 sub-Saharan African countries embarked on a visit to an agricultural farm in Maryland. VOA's Lionel Gahima and Eric Manirakiza, who is no relation to the farm owner, met with some of them and have this story narrated by Lionel Gahima.
This farm, owned by Jean Berkemans Manirakiza, is more than 2 hectares. Manirakiza grows Afro-Caribbean heritage crops and uses his family farm to serve underserved communities such as refugees and immigrants. Today, he's welcoming young African leaders.
This is farming. It's not taking naps.
The young leaders dedicated 67 minutes of their time working on the farm to former South African President Nelson Mandela, who spent 67 years fighting for social justice. Lerato Sono, a university lecturer from Pretoria, South Africa, said she isn't exposed to the farming industry back home, but said it was important for her to get a hands-on experience.
The highlight of it was just not working on the farm and knowing that you're giving back to a farm that is very intentional about growing African crops, but also about how Africa has actually saved America's agricultural industry. So it kind of pushed me to also learn a lot more about my own African history through different industries, like the agricultural industries.
Young leaders like Isaac Pomboloka of Zambia said they are resolute in using the knowledge and experiences they have acquired to the development of their communities.
So this is special. It was not just about a farming activity, but it is special because I'm getting to learn a lot of things about how agriculture system is marketed and how you add value to different kinds of activities you do here. And so this is beautiful for me, and I'm looking forward to do some great impactful things on my continent.
Some of them, like Liberia's Janislav Brople, decided to use the opportunity to showcase traditional food from her country.
Yeah, people are making all kinds of different food. We have Senegalese jollof, we have pepper soup, we have barbecue, all kinds of different food. But there are other things I've learned here from my South African friends. There's something called pap.
As the air fills with delightful exotic flavors and spices intermingle with tantalizing aromas, laughter and joy accompany each culinary preparation. Zambia's Pomboloka said the experience has changed his outlook in life, both professionally and personally.
This is just the beginning, because there is just so much that I've learned. Actually, I don't think I can go through this program and yet I'm going to remain the same. And the approach to the project that I run, I think the approach to life as well, even the approach to my personal and professional life, I think everything is going to change because I've interacted with quite high-performing individuals here.
Departing from the farm, the fellows say they carry with them unforgettable memories, deeper bonds of friendship, and bridges of companionship that surpass borders. With Eric Manirakiza, Lionel Gahima, VOA News, Prince George's County, Maryland.
It's time for Entertainment Report, and joining us now is Heather Maxwell, host of VOA's Music Time in Africa radio program with the latest on Kiswahili Language Day. Hello, Heather.
Hello, everyone. In Kenya, where, Esther, as you know, Kiswahili is one of the official languages, visitors from around the world turned up in Mombasa to enjoy Swahili art, poetry, and dance. And in Nairobi, a panel of experts discussed the rise of Kiswahili. There was a spoken word performance known in Kiswahili as shairi, and the legendary Swahili rumba band Les Wanika performed some of their all-time favorites like Sina Makosa. Let's listen.
You said it like a native. Sina Makosa. Sina Makosa we bwana. Sina Makosa we bwana. Sina Makosa we bwana.
Now, in the United States, Kentucky also embraced Kiswahili Day with a big celebration. Elisha Mutayongwa, who leads the Marifiki Center, an outreach center for African youth, explains.
Swahili Day in Lexington was June the 3rd, and the Swahili Day was growing, and it's also a product of a growing number of Swahili speakers here in Lexington. We talked to the city of Lexington of approving as a third most spoken language, and also proclaimed that whole Swahili Day with the city approval.
June 3rd, 2023, Swahili Day in Lexington.
I just want to, create a space where our kids, our family, our friends can come, and see people that look like them, people that speak the same language, people that understand the language, people that can communicate. So I think for me, the drive is just the passion to see a community grow, to see a community prosper, to see a community found, a home here, which is already a home, but how do we create that safe home, then celebrating our culture and showcase the value that come with it.
All right, and as they say in Kiswahili, asante sana. Now, we've got more Les Wanyika performing Sina Makosa to roll for you at the end of the show, if time permits. In the meantime, it's back to you, Esther.
I hope there's time. Heather, thanks. Be sure to join Heather Maxwell as she reports on her entertainment every Friday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend. Do the cinema.